We'll start with Mr. Genuis for 5, or, Ms. Kusi for 6, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Conacher, why do you think it is that the President of the Treasury Board announced last week that after the report coming out of Ethics Committee that she was not prepared to make any changes to the ATIP process? Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't understand it. It certainly doesn't comply with any democratic good government principles that have been established at the international level. It also breaks the Liberal government's promises in terms of open government that were made back in 2015, continues to break them, I should say. The government is focused on and claiming that open data, making some information more proactively available online, is the same thing as open government. But open government is the public's right to access information the government wants to hide. Open data is just making the information the government wants to disclose more available. They're not the same thing, and this government has a record of excessive secrecy, as the Information Commissioner has documented, and has broken all of its open government promises except a couple of them.
Yeah, thank you for that. I believe in her press conference, she indicated that she will not be looking at the matter until 2025, when conveniently that is expected to be the year of the next election. My next question for you, Mr. Conacher, would be, do you consider GC strategists to be lobbyists? They've been presented in this scenario as vendors, but in your opinion, could they be perceived as lobbyists, or would you consider them lobbyists?
Just to say, in terms of all the changes that I recommended generally, I would hope opposition party leaders will, as with Bill C-290, join together and introduce bills to strengthen the Access to Information Act, the Lobbying Act, the Conflict of Interest Act, and other democratic government measures. Like Bill C-290, the opposition parties have a majority in the House and should be passing these bills and daring the Liberals and the Senate to vote against them. In terms of GC strategies, first of all, there's not supposed to be any lobbying during procurement processes. You can ask questions of the government institution that is contracting out, and then the answers will go to all the bidders. So that is a registry of who asked the question, what the answer was, and that's all that's allowed. Otherwise, you're lobbying. You are communicating in respect of decisions, and the big, huge loophole in the Lobbying Act, unfortunately, is that if you are not paid for the lobbying, you do not have to register. So if you have a contract that says, I'm just providing strategic advice to you, and you're paying me for the advice, any lobbying I do for you is free, then you cannot be prosecuted under the Lobbying Act because you have not been paid for lobbying. It's a loophole that has to be changed, along with several other loopholes, to ensure that all lobbying is disclosed and secret lobbying is illegal. And that's one of the big problem areas in this and many other policymaking processes, that secret lobbying, also if the Lobbying Act doesn't apply to you, you can unethically lobby. So you can provide gifts and assistance to people that you're trying to get government decisions from, because you're not covered by the Lobbying Act and therefore not covered by the Lobbyist Code. Until these loopholes are closed, as I said, the system is the scandal. Expect more scandals because the system encourages them.
Thank you. Mr. Terrazzano, in a Globe and Mail article published on August 2nd of this year, you stated that we want the government to really go a step further and ensure that maximum transparency is built into the contracts and negotiating process, so businesses know up front that if they are going to take taxpayers' money, then they're going to be required to be transparent with the public. Do you agree that subcontractors should be included in ATIP requests?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, especially with this, when we're now talking to have a total bill of $54 million for a simple app. How do we know it's a simple app? Because 2 independent techies were able to build it or recreate it over 2 days. So I think taxpayers have every reason to be scratching our heads right now, wondering who is going to be held accountable for this $54 million scandal. And I think one of the reasons why all of this happened is a lack of transparency.
Do you think that government departments should be aware of any subcontracting relationships that stem from the federal funding of private suppliers?
Yeah, sure. I absolutely think there needs to be more information.
How would you recommend that the federal government increase its oversight into subcontractors without undue administrative burden and to ensure that the federal government is not overpaying for its services?
Okay, a couple. So number one, the Information Commissioner on the Government of Canada's review, published in January 2021, makes a great recommendation for this. Recommendation number 2 is essentially that agencies that are getting these outsourced contracts be subject to the access to information. Right now, one of the access to information requests we got back, tons of redactions, and the government is essentially using Section 16 and Section 19 to withhold information that the public deserves.
And in your opinion, what's the impact on Canada's economy when contracts are given to private suppliers to then subcontract this work rather than focusing on in-house solutions?
I'm afraid that is our time, but maybe you can answer that in writing to
Thank you,
the
Chair.
committee.
Thank you,
Mr.
witnesses.
Sousa, you're up for 6, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Certainly, we are all concerned about ensuring that there's proper discipline, transparency, and integrity in the process of procurement. And I know as a government, at all levels, frankly, we take that very seriously. We want to ensure that everyone abides by the rules and that we concur with the outcomes. So I appreciate you being here and looking for those answers and transparencies. Mr. Chair, I'm also interested, do you sit on the board of the Taxpayers Federation?
No, I don't.
So you're not one of the volunteer directors?
I am a federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. For more information on the structure of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, head over to taxpayer.com. You can take a look at our website, and while you're there, we've got a bunch of great petitions to sign. A popular one right now is scrap the carbon tax.
How many directors are on the board?
Once again, if you want more
I
information
went on it.
about the
It doesn't say.
Look,
It didn't tell me how many board members there are.
already we spent a minute talking about the Canadian Taxpayers
Why don't you want to answer
Federation.
that question?
So let me just say, with respect to the member, if you want all of the information about the Canadian taxpayers, an overview of our financial statements, head over to taxpayer.com. And I will just add, if you just spent half of the time worrying about the people who fund your pay, as you are right now questioning me about the CTF, all taxpayers would be better off.
Actually, I'm just trying to assess the level of representation because the Taxpayers Federation, you do create a great voice, but I'm just trying to understand the consequence. Like, you can't tell me how many board members there are, how many directors are on the board?
We have 235,000
How many
Canadian
board
supporters.
members?
In 2021 and 2022, the CTF raised $5 million on the strength of more than 45,000 donations. The average donation is around $110. So
Yeah.
I am here on behalf of hundreds of thousands of Canadians who want answers for a
Yeah.
$54 million
It's my time, Mr. Chair. So I understand from your response, though, Atlas Network, state
So we
policy
do
for
not
the United
take, we
States
do
are
not
also
take any
major
funding.
donors,
We do
and
not
they're
take
U.S.
any
donors,
funding
not just
from
Canadians.
international sources.
So
Only
if I could
Canadian
ask the
tax-
next
only
question,
Canadians.
if I may.
Sorry, let me interrupt. Please let Mr. Sousa finish, and then I'll give
Mr.
you.
Franco, you're very, very concerned about this. I'm not trying to accuse anybody of anything. I'm just trying to assess the level of the nonpartisan activity of the Taxpayers Federation. And I know that many elected politicians have sat on the Taxpayers Federation, like Jason Kenney and Mike Harris and Rob Ford and a number of other great Canadians who have represented a strong partisan level of reform and Conservative Party, and that's okay. I just wanted to be clear as to the public and those here in the committee to understand that level of nonpartisan and the level of integrity by which going forward. I'm just trying to sense the level of funding that is received by the United States of America to your federation, the level of or the lack of transparency in terms of your board and how they're elected, because they're not elected by your members. They're not elected by the very people that you've made mention. By the bylaws, I understand, you're just electing yourselves within that board, and you're not being very clear. So I'm going to proceed with my next question as to the analysis of the Arrive Can. I mean, just out of curiosity, have you spoken to law enforcement in regards to the Arrive Can issue?
So we do not take a cent outside of Canada.
Have you
we have
spoken to any?
235,000 Canadian supporters. Okay, and we're here because hundreds of thousands of Canadians
And
are
we're all
demanding
concerned.
answers
Yeah.
to the $54 million Arrive Can scandal.
I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that.
Saying
Mr. Sousa?
that the cost
Mr.
of this
Sousa.
was supposed to be
Mr. Terrazzano, we have a point of
$250,000.
order. Sorry to interrupt. Mr. Jouari?
Can you kindly ask the witness to answer the question? Thank you.
It's not as much.
On the same point of order.
Go ahead, Mr. Generous.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The Liberals are clearly more interested in holding private organizations accountable than they are in being accountable themselves. I wish they were as interested in answering questions about their own behavior and they were in asking questions to private citizens and private organizations.
It's a statement. Yeah.
Colleagues, let people finish the point of orders and let me rule on them before you already start criticizing me. Is this a point of order, Mr. Johns?
Yes, it is.
Can you make it pretty brief so I can
do want
discuss
Mr.
it
Terrazano. I
and
want
we
to hear
can
from
move
him, actually, and he's brought forward some really good, important feedback back to this committee. But I ran a Chamber of Commerce. I can remember years ago how many people sat on my board. And I'd never forget any board how many people sit on my board. I think this is a reasonable question. He's a witness testifying at the committee. He should answer the question.
Yeah.
It's under oath.
None of these, let me judge. I will be honest, I don't believe any of these are valid points of order. I would just ask Mr. Souza to ask the questions and not overtalk Mr. Terrazano. Mr. Terrazano is free to answer as opaquely as ministers do, as deputy ministers do, and other ministers. And Mr. Souza is welcome to be as pointed as perhaps the chair was in past life, sitting on and asking the questions. Can we proceed because we're running short of time?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
About,
I'll proceed with Mr.
You have
Conacher.
a minute 4 left, please.
If I can go with Mr. Conacher. The Auditor General is in the midst, as you know, of completing this audit of ArriveCan, the applications. Do you have confidence in her ability to complete the audit, Mr. Conacher?
I do generally. I would prefer the appointment process for all of Canada's democratic good government watchdogs and the good government watchdogs across the country to be more nonpartisan, to be a independent commission coming up with a short list of qualified candidates and then sending it to an all-party committee to make the final choice rather than having it in the hands of the ruling party. But the fact that she has a fixed term of office does help secure her independence and help secure
I'm sensitive to time.
Political interference.
In regards to the RCMP who's currently undergoing the investigation regarding the ArriveCan, do you trust the RCMP in completing its investigation?
I have the same concerns with regard to the appointment process of the commissioner. It was done by the ruling party cabinet. It should not be that way. It should be a nonpartisan process because the RCMP and all the other watchdogs are enforcing key laws that apply mostly to cabinet and should not be chosen by cabinet. I also have serious questions about the RCMP based on what we have discovered through access to information requests concerning the investigation of the SNC-Lavalin affair and the fact that we're still waiting for 2,200 pages of documents. The RCMP is still hiding a year and a half after we requested them.
That is our time.
Okay,
Madame Vignola for 6, please.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Terrazano, Mr. Kochner, I have the same question for both of you. Some of our witnesses during previous discussions on ArriveCan suggested that in the long term, it would be smarter for the government to invest in public servants who are specialized in IT and should also provide training. Do you think that that kind of strategy would help us optimize the resources in place in the federal government? And if not, how do you think we should optimize the resources that are currently available? Thank you. Mr. Terrazano first, please.
Pas de problème. Si d'engager de nouvelles...
If hiring people and or training those who are already in the public servant in IT, if that is not the right solution, then first of all, why not? And second, what should we do that would really be a good solution that would be a good deal for consumers from whom I receive frequent emails? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate the question. So, for starters, it's hard to believe that we couldn't find, of the additional 98,000 government employees that have been hired since 2015, that we couldn't tap 2 of them to be able to figure out who in Canada can actually build and do the IT work on an app. So it's hard to believe, as the in-house costs of the government have increased by about 40% additional bureaucrats since 2015, that we couldn't tap them to figure out who to actually build and maintain the app. And the second question, as it relates to recommendations, well, number one, we're really looking for accountability moving forward. Which government employee is going to be held accountable for this? Who's going to lose their bonus? Who's going to be out of a job? And also, too, we got to improve transparency measures. We talked about the Information Commissioner's recommendations to make sure the agencies who are getting these outsourced contracts are fully transparent with taxpayers, to make sure that government institutions can't use different sections of the Act, specifically Section 19 and Section 16, to withhold information from taxpayers. And as I mentioned, as a brownie point, I do believe that we should also implement a sunshine list like the vast majority of Canadian provinces.
Merci. Monsieur
You have
Conacher?
3 minutes.
Monsieur Conacher?
Mr. Conacher?
Yes. Pardon moi, je vais.
I will answer in English, but I do have to practice my French a lot.
The situation, I think, is that I was interviewed now almost 20 years ago by a CBC reporter about a past IT, information technology scandal. And I said, it's not surprising at all. You have middle-level executives who don't know computers very well trying to make huge computer purchases. And of course, they're going to choose wrong. We need to have a system put in place of people in-house in the public service who know what they're doing. And then if you want to have people like GC Strategies, well, then you just pay them as advisors. They should not be getting 20 to 30% commissions for finding subcontractors. Just pay them as advisors for a contracting process to do a due diligence as to whether the company's bidding have competence. And they would be paid not $11 million to give that advice. So it's just a capacity issue. It's existed for 20 years. I think if you looked at any big business, you would find the same thing, that for a long period of time, you had middle executives who had no expertise in computers and technology, making huge technology purchases and screwing up and wasting a bunch of money most of the time.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Earlier on, I asked officials a question about something that really surprises me, which is that no public servant at any level revealed that something intriguing was occurring with these ArriveCAN contracts. I would like to know if you have a hypothesis about this. What explains that nobody internally spoke up? I will start with Mr. Kochner and then Mr. Terrazzano.
We only have 35 seconds, so brief, please.
Thank you. Well, you know well the gaps in whistleblower protection. So you're always sticking your neck out if you blow the whistle in the public service, and people outside the public service can't blow the whistle. I think that really is what explains it. And it is controversial, but I think there should be a duty to report. If you do have witness wrongdoing or something that seems to be wrong, you should have to report it to the Integrity Commissioner. I know that's a controversial recommendation, but I believe in it.
Time. Mr. Johns for 6, please.
Okay. We're obviously moving C-290 through the House right now around whistleblowing. And subcontractors aren't included. Mr. Terrazzano, do you think that needs to be fixed? Clearly, that we need to be able to provide an outlet, because this company, Bottler, took a lot of risk. They came out, I think they're heroes, really, for stepping out and taking, because they're going to be potentially penalized by the government. Can you speak to that? the importance of fixing
So
this?
I haven't reviewed that specific piece of legislation, but I think if you can encourage the most amount of transparency as possible around the procurement, as much whistleblower protections as possible, I think that is a good step in the right direction to encourage the transparency.
How do you feel about, like, you see government officials working in really high-level roles, and politicians too? They leave the government and they go and work for big, huge outsourcing companies. Do you have a problem with the optics with that?
Well, no, I think the problem comes into place when there aren't guardrails on the government side, and when there is a lack of transparency, and when you have government agencies and institutions bending the rules when it comes to transparency requirements. And we've seen that firsthand just with the ATIPs that we got back in this, where we literally have about 300 pages that contain redactions. And I think taxpayers deserve that information. And Mr. Johns, just to throw a kudos to you, I've seen some of your comments in the media about it's wrong to keep Canadian taxpayers in the dark. Yeah. And I think that's what happened right from the beginning of this process.
Thanks. Mr. Conacher, Bottler has shared with the Globe and Mail firsthand accounts and physical evidence show a pretty cozy relationship between Mr. Firth and government officials. When a government contractor refers to public officials as his personal friends and urges prospective contractors to single out a public official for praise, when a public official is offering live coaching to prospective contractors as they pitch their product, does that show a typical relationship between a democratic government and private contractors, or does it seem like an improper one, and does it raise any red flags in your experience?
It raises a lot of red flags, violations of the lobbyist code, and I believe these people are lobbyists. The lobbyist code does not allow you to lobby someone, which means communicate in respect of their decisions when you have a relationship with them, of friendship that causes the appearance of a conflict of interest. And then on the government side, the executive testifying earlier said that he expected all of his team to follow the values and ethics code for the public service. Problem is, it's just an expectation. My father had an old saying, people do what you inspect, not what you expect. And there is not inspection. People can go, it's all an honor system, and honor systems don't work. They work for most people who are honorable, but whatever percentage it is that are not, you need inspection, auditing systems, you need full disclosure of their values, their assets and liabilities, and their conflicts of interest before any decision-making process begins, with a watchdog that is auditing and inspecting regularly so everyone knows you have a high chance of getting caught. Otherwise, as I said, the system's the scandal and you're going to get scandalous behavior.
Can you talk about what the consequences would be for violating lobbying rules and what the cost would be? The consequences for violating the Lobbying Act are high, but the RCMP over the last 20 years has just shown they won't enforce it. They just bumped 5 cases back to of 11 that have been referred by the lobbying commissioner back to the commissioner, and the commissioner dropped all 5. And there's been like 3 prosecutions since 1988. It's a joke. They just don't take it seriously. The lobbyist code, the consequence is a report in Parliament that you violated the lobbyist code. That's not going to discourage anyone. There's several lobbyists who have been found guilty of violating the lobbyist code who were promoted and got more contracts as lobbyists. So obviously, because they send a message to the marketplace that they'll lobby unethically if it gets you what you want, and people want that. But lobbying, how much money would you make on a contract like this? I mean, they're making $11 million in this current model. What would they make as a lobbyist on average? Well, I don't know the averages because it's not required to be disclosed. You don't have to disclose, unlike in the U.S., how much you are spending on lobbying efforts as an organization or how much you're paying consultant lobbyists. It should be part of what's disclosed. It's one of the loopholes in the Lobbying Act. But the penalties, you could go to jail. But as I said, the RCMP has let 9 out of 10 lobbyists off the hook. So there's now, what's the incentive to comply? And if you don't have an incentive to comply, you won't see compliance. Okay. As a committee, we've seen how difficult or even impossible it is to trace the government spending when it's hidden in layers of subcontracting. Can you talk about what problems this raises? And obviously, the NDP, we'd like to see this done in-house, or at least for the middle person to be cut out of the equation. But if the government is going to continue to contract in some contract out, do you have any recommendations for how that can be documented in a way that does allow transparency and accountability?
Yeah, I'm going to pitch off Mr. Conacher. Sorry, we only have about 40 seconds, so please be brief or just offer to send in a response. But please go ahead.
As I mentioned, increase in-house capacity and then have advisors who you don't have to pay $11 million and then just contract to those who are bidding without subcontracting. And the Access to Information Act has to apply to everyone who receives the contract. You can't be hiding subcontractors' names under the so-called Access to Information Act.
Thank you, both of you. Mr. Brock, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To you, Mr. Terrazzano, I want to thank you for all the work, all the good work, important work that you're doing at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Your vigilance in terms of ensuring that taxpayers receive value from this government is admirable. I just wish the government would take a page from the good work that you do. Primarily, my questions are to you, Mr. Conacher. I appreciate your legal background. Did you ever practice criminal law?
No, actually, I never practiced law. I was a non-practicing member of the bar for 10 years, and then haven't practiced.
I want you to hearken back to first-year law school and criminal law. I'm sure you took first-year law, basic principles of mens rea and actus reus. So I know that you were successful, sir, through an ATIP of receiving some 1,815 pages of RCMP records with respect to, quote unquote, their assessment as opposed to investigation. We now know that there are well over 2,000 pages that have yet to be released to you. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
And quite frankly, sir, with my legal background over 30 years, I have prosecuted multiple homicides that actually had less disclosure than obstruction of justice. All criminal code offenses are serious. This one in particular is very serious. It's a hybrid offense. And if convicted by indictment, that individual would go to prison. So I appreciate the seriousness by which you conducted yourself, sir, on behalf of Canadians. Now, there have been certain details that have been released in the press with respect to some of the information that was learned by you and others with respect to this information, these records. It's abundantly clear that for close to 4 years that the RCMP, who claims in a newspaper report that they conducted the most thorough and comprehensive and fair assessment of all the evidence, only interviewed 3 people. Are you aware of that, sir?
Yes, that's what the records show.
And the reason I'm asking these questions, sir, is because the NDP Liberal Coalition actually shut down an ethics committee yesterday to prevent the RCMP commissioner from testifying on very important details as to how they legally concluded that they lacked the reasonable and probable grounds to arrest Justin Trudeau for obstruction of justice. So I want to hearken back to your legal career, Mr. Conacher, and think about the evidence that Canadians did hear, that we as parliamentarians heard, but more importantly, the evidence the RCMP heard. The evidence the RCMP heard was the direct testimony of our former first ever Indigenous Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, who kept incredible detailed notes and also recorded conversations. So I want you to factor that in, and also factor in our former ethics commissioner, Mr. Dion, who concluded that the Prime Minister, with the support of friends and other members of Cabinet and the Prime Minister's office, conducted a series of overt, direct acts attempting to influence the decision of Jody Wilson-Raybould. And you know, sir, that under the criminal code, under section 139, the actual obstruction need not take place, that you could be found guilty just with an attempt. Is that fair?
Yes, attempt is covered.
Right. So do you find it rather curious that the RCMP, after 4 years interviewing a sum total of 3 individuals, that the ethics commissioner actually quadrupled, I think they interviewed 16 to 17 witnesses, collapsed the House of Cards and claimed that there was no corrupt intent on behalf of the Prime Minister? Were you aware of that phrase that the RCMP used?
Yes, that's in the records.
Agree with me, sir, that a corrupt intent is not an essential ingredient to the mens rea requirement under Section 139. In fact, all you need to prove is it criminalizes deliberate acts which seek to obstruct, interfere, or hinder the pursuit of justice. And in this case, the pursuit of justice is Jody Wilson-Raybould had the courage to say, no, Mr. Prime Minister, you are not going to influence me, and I'm not going to give a remediation agreement to a corporate entity in Quebec that has some serious criminal charges. So you can understand and appreciate why
Mr. Brock,
you can understand and appreciate why we wanted to hear from the Commissioner. Would you agree?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that is our time. Mr. Kuzmierczuk, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And question to Mr. Conacher. There's 2 companies that are sort of at the heart of the allegations, and that's 2 companies called Dalian and Cordix. And the allegations of fraud state that they had submitted in their bids inflated experience or inflated information that would then allow them, for example, to get increased per diems or actually qualify for the contract. Mr. Conacher, is this something that happens with regularity in these types of processes? And I ask that because, again, this is a very, very serious issue. This goes to the heart of the issue of trust in our procurement process. And so I very much appreciate you being here to answer our questions.
I don't know how regularly that occurs. It is one of the most difficult parts of this situation, I think, which is how much due diligence has to be done within government and before a contract is handed out. The problem with subcontracting is that it exponentially increases the due diligence burden on the government officials. And that's why I think that you should do everything should be changed to eliminate these middle people and just have companies who are actually doing the work bidding on the contract without all of these complicated subcontracting schemes, because they are schemes and they're going to hide something as a result and likely result in some violations of the rules that would not be possible if it was a direct contract with a direct bidder.
I appreciate that very much, and I mentioned trust, and again, this issue has been caught. It is being studied right now and investigated. Should Canadians trust the investigation? You already spoke about trusting the Auditor General in her work. Can we trust the RCMP process to get to the bottom of this, in your opinion, from what you've seen in the past?
As I mentioned with the SNC Lavalin situation, there's so many questions that have been raised, so much excessive secrecy and silence from the RCMP over 4 years. We essentially forced disclosure and forced them to make a public statement about the situation after 4 years. It shouldn't be allowed by any rule. And so, no, I have very serious questions about the RCMP. The executive mentioned there's an internal investigation going on and that it's independent. No internal investigation is independent. It's just not. An independent investigation means someone who's actually independent, is not in the pay hierarchy or the power hierarchy of an organization. And so that's why we have the Democratic government watchdogs, but they're all chosen by the ruling party with very little consultation or input from the opposition parties. And it shouldn't be that way as well. All of these things need to change. The rules need to be strengthened, enforcement and penalties, or the system's a scandal and you're going to see scandalous behavior continue.
Thank you. A question for Mr. Terrazzano. obviously, if the RCMP does find evidence of wrongdoing in this particular case, and what are some of the consequences? Should we expand the scope? I look at the facts. The two companies, again, at the center of this concern is Cordix and Dalian. Now, they've had contracts with the Conservative government that date back all the way to 2013. They received $22.8 million from the Harper government. 2014, $26.6 million Harper government. 2015, to $27.6 million Harper government, for a total of $75 million. If there is wrongdoing that's been found by these two companies, Cordix and Dalian, do you think that we should expand? Do you think the RCMP Auditor General should expand that investigation to reach back in time, to look at those contracts?
Well, thank you for the question. I'll leave the specifics when it comes to the legal issues with the RCMP and the Auditor General report. We'll leave with the Auditor General until we see the report. What I'm really hoping for this committee is to look forward and how to put in the guardrails to make sure that this doesn't happen again, where we get a simple app for $54 million hit to taxpayers. And I think the best two ways to do that is to ensure accountability, right? Taxpayers are out $54 million because of the ArriveCan app. Which bureaucrat or bureaucrats are going to be out of a job? Which bureaucrat or bureaucrats are going to be out of a bonus? Because I think we can't just have the incentive as we look down the road, no matter which party's in power, whether it's the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP, or the Bloc, whatever party's in power, we can't have the incentive to be, hey, you know, you can get away with all this type of waste and it doesn't matter because you'll get a bonus.
That is our time. Ms. Vinola for 2.5, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Terrazzano, in January 2023, you published an article in which you expressed your skepticism about the possibility of an internal examination of ArriveCan at the Government of Canada. And your skepticism was especially about the fact that even if there was a review, nothing much would change. What could lead to a real change aside from removing the bonuses? And of course, I completely agree with you that there should be a list, a checklist before people can get their bonuses. But what would make an internal review truly meaningful, and what would make it so that there's true accountability? And if you are going to speak about a sunshine list, can you explain exactly what you mean by that for those who are listening?
Is just to disclose the compensation of the top earners in government and to see how that trend is increasing year over year. As I mentioned, the vast majority of provincial governments implement a sunshine list for Transparency 101 for taxpayers, and I think that is a good transparent movement for all Canadians at the federal level. And so what would make an internal study as good as possible from this committee? You mentioned the bonuses. I mentioned the bonuses earlier. I do think the committee needs to identify which government employees were responsible for the wrongdoing, where we go from $80,000 to $26 million to $54 million. Who was responsible? And then above that, why weren't other government employees, especially those at the top, why weren't they saying anything when it was $80,000, $800,000, $8 million costs, $18 million costs, and so on? Beyond that, I really do believe an immediate step to improve transparency is to just take the recommendations from the Information Commissioner published on January 2021, specifically recommendation number 2 and 4 with respect to agencies who get these types of contracts to be subject to the Access to Information Act, and then recommendation 4 being that government employees or institutions can't skirt the Access to Information requests with Sections 19 when it doesn't apply.
Thanks, Mr. Terrazzano. Thanks, Ms. Vinola. Mr. Johns, over to you. But before you start, please, we need, if you could read into the record the information you requested earlier, just so we have it properly on the record. I won't take away your time, but go ahead, please.
Thank you. There's 6 questions I asked, and so sorry, please be patient. The first question was on September 27th, 2021. Bottler informed the CBSA to immediately stop payments to the contractors and request a refund of any amounts already paid. And the question was, what did CBSA do in response? We didn't get an answer. We asked for that to be tabled. The other one is GC Strategies named on the Bottler task authorization, and they didn't answer. Did the CBSA suggest that payments for this task authorization should flow through Cordax to GC Strategies and then finally on to Bottler? Next one is, how much did the CBSA grant in additional contracts to GC Strategies, Cordax, and Dalian after the report on September 27th, 2021? And lastly, has the CBSA, no, that's not the last one, has the CBSA ever consulted legal services with respect to Bottler's allegations? And she couldn't answer. To Mr. Doan, so those are all to Ms. O'Gorman to report back to the House within 30 days. To Mr. Doan, how many projects with GC Strategies as either a contractor or subcontractor were approved during your term as CIO of the CBSA? And what is the total value of those contracts?
Thanks. Please go ahead with your 2.5, Mr. Johns. Sorry.
And 30 days too for Mr. Doan, yes.
Thanks. Go ahead with your 2.5, please.
Thank you. So, Mr. Conacher, thanks to Ms. Dutt and Mr. Morv, we also have access to an email they received from Mr. Firth of GC Strategies. It's absolutely outrageous. Mr. Firth tells them, quote, Cordax Dalian was brought in as a pass-through, and they demanded 15%. And your cost plus 15% for me and 20% for Cordax, etc., it rose to close to $500,000. End quote. He describes how CBSA was, quote, pissed at the resulting price increase, and he says he wasn't going to tell Bottler about the Dalian middleman at all. He thought he could leave them, quote, none the wiser, end quote. Personally, I cannot be convinced that Dalian was necessary to facilitate this work when the party doing the work didn't even know they existed. On top of that, Mr. Firth is so confident that he can get Bottler additional government contracts that he appears to offer to waive his fee for this contract and recover it from future ones. This is all public information. He says he's willing to remove himself from the deal. He asks if Bottler wants him to recover from Cordax or let it slide and look out to the next one and recover. He meant a possible future contract with CRA. So my question is, if Mr. Firth is indeed suggesting that Bottler pay him for his work on this project out of a future contract, would that be an example of contract performance fraud? And what other concerns does this raise for you, Mr. Conacher?
Yes, and the other concern it raises is essentially saying it's a contingency fee payment. Future contracts that I will get from you, you'll pay me then a slice of that contract for essentially as a success fee, and that is illegal under the Lobbying Act. So that's the other concern that it raises.
In terms of like your overall response to this, when you see it, what are your thoughts in terms of what needs to change to never allow this to happen again?
Well, again, increasing the capacity of the public service internally, but also increasing the accountability of the public service. If people internally are going to be handing out these contracts as opposed to using these middlemen who are really lobbyists, the ones who are getting the contracts and subcontracting, they're really acting as lobbyists who have built these relationships and then are the gateway for all sorts of
Mr. Conacher, I apologize.
companies.
We have to cut you off there because we're down to our last few minutes. But again, maybe you could provide in writing the rest of your answer. We are going to go, we just have a tiny bit more time. We're going to go for 2.5 minutes with Mr. Genuis and then 2.5 Mr. Kuzmirchuk. Please go ahead, sir.
Wow. Okay. A follow-up on our request for information first. It was referred to that 6 DGs worked for Mr. Doan. I would like to request the names of those individuals as well as emails sent or received from them using the words Firth, Anthony, or GC Strategies from March 2020 to the present, and I'd like them from the department within 30 days. Is there agreement from the committee for that request?
Yep. Fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Terrazzano, thank you for your work. I wonder if Mr. Sousa is being tough on you because he's smarting from your recent revelation about NCC spending $8 million replacing a barn. I have farmers in my riding, and I think many of them could build a barn for less than $8 million. Do you want to speak ever so briefly to that revelation?
Yeah, I mean, $8 million on a barn. The National Capital Commission and Rideau Hall teamed up to soak taxpayers for a whole bunch of waste. But look, I think the real issue here with the ArriveCan app is the fact that it originally launched for $80,000, and then at the end of the day, we somehow end up with a total of $54 million hit to the taxpayer. And I think all Canadians who are worried about this scandal are now left scratching their head, wondering who is going to be held accountable. And if no one is going to be held accountable for this within the government, then what's stopping this type of waste from happening again?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think fundamentally we need to replace this Liberal NDP government with a government that cares about spending and values taxpayers' money. Mr. Chair, I am very concerned about the testimony we received in the previous hour. The gaps in the testimony previously shared with the committee, and as such, I would like to move the following motion: that the committee report to the House this motion of censure expressing strong disapproval of testimony given by Aaron O'Gorman on November 14th, 2022, and John Osowski on December 8th, 2022. In an apparent breach of the committee's privileges, Mr. Osowski definitively and inaccurately denied any contact with Christian Firth, and Ms. O'Gorman failed to share information at the committee about an RCMP investigation, despite knowing about the investigation at the time. Chair, I think it's important for us to report to the House these concerns that we have regarding the testimony that was received, because committees need accurate information from witnesses in order to do their jobs. And in the one case, the committee received information that apparently was inadvertently inaccurate, but I checked the record from December 8th, and Mr. Osowski was quite definitive. He didn't say "not to my knowledge" with respect to contact with Mr. Firth. He said a definitive no. And I think the committee might be inclined to view the issue more charitably if he had simply said, you know, it's possible, I don't recall, but he was very definitive in his denial at that time. And I think the evidence suggests that Ms. O'Gorman, although as far as I can tell, was not directly asked about an RCMP investigation, she should have been forthcoming about that information. And for committees to do their work, they need clear, forthcoming, and accurate testimony. And when there are areas that witnesses are not aware of, they should at least acknowledge those things. And we continue to be looking for information about who made this decision, who was responsible for this decision, and that information continues to be withheld. So I want to put that motion forward. Thank you.
I'm going to assume you do not have that in French to circulate.
Chair, I'm moving it as the matter at hand, and I'm moving it verbally. I have been putting it together in the course of the discussions here, so I did send it to the clerk maybe 10 minutes ago, but I assume the translation process isn't complete yet.
Yeah, no, I'm just asking because I'm hearing requests to have it distributed, so I just wanted to double check before I say it's not available to distribute. Can you colleagues, just give me 15 seconds, please? Colleagues, just quickly, I'm going to, if everyone's fine, we're going to dismiss our witnesses because there's a couple other things I have to discuss before we continue with that. So, Mr. Conacher, thank you again for joining us. Thank you always for your advocacy for whistleblowers. I appreciate it. Mr. Terzano and... we are out of time, and I have to get to other things which will make sense, trust me. Mr. Thorpe, thanks for showing up, but I'm going to just dismiss. We also are at a point where we have to grant our interpreters at least an hour break at this point. So I'm going to suggest we suspend just for a couple more seconds so we can excuse our translators, and let me just chat with on
Mr. Chair,
options.
move to adjourn.
Okay. We have a motion to adjourn.
Point of order, Chair. Chair, I've put this motion on the floor highlighting significant concerns we have about testimony. The government wants to adjourn that discussion right away, clearly. I'm not sure if the government even properly had the floor when they moved that motion, and you do have to have the floor to move a motion. And again, the government is looking for ways to shut down the conversation of this issue clearly, and that's obviously very disappointing, but not at all surprising that they're moving to shut down the discussion right now. But they do have to do so within the rules, and I don't believe that member had the floor.
Colleagues, we require to take an hour break as soon as possible. So I am going to suspend the meeting for an hour. I'm sorry, we have to suspend as soon as possible. I prefer not, no. Real brief, Mr. Johns.
Can we just come up with an agreement to bring this back Thursday? I think it's worth a conversation. That's all I'm working for, because I think a lot of us have commitments here tonight. I'm supposed to be in the House myself, so I hope we can come to terms with an agreement to bring this back Thursday and have a full conversation.
Okay.
But we have the Bottler witnesses for 2 hours on Thursday.
Hey, colleagues, so. I'm gonna suspend because we have to suspend. I will discuss this separately, but we are suspended. We